Hey guys, welcome back to Reserved Investments on YouTube. So the one type of video that's been stuck in a developmental hole for the last several months is my introductory video on archival storage and preservation of antiques and collectibles. Doesn't matter what you collect. Whether you collect comic books, toys, coins, artwork, antiques, furniture, doesn't matter, guys. It's all gonna fall under the archival storage and preservation of antiques and collectibles. So this is going to be an introductory video to that particular topic. Now, I've spent a lot of time thinking how I want to present this particular topic to my viewing audience, because I'm going to be very honest. I've interacted with a lot of you now, whether it be in the comment section, whether you got to email me or talk to me on the phone. All of you guys out there are all at different levels. I have people that watch this channel that just started collecting antiques and collectibles literally last year. They're kind of new. They're a little wet behind the ears. They need a lot of guidance. On the other end of the spectrum, I have people that watch this channel who have 7- and 8-digit net worths, who have already put together literally 6-figure, 7-figure collections to the point where they know a lot of the things that I talk about like the back of their hand. And then, of course, between those two poles, I have everybody else in between. So the way I'm going to introduce this topic is going to appeal to all of you. If you feel this is a very elementary video, simply don't watch it. I'm not going to get offended. But if you want to learn the basics of antique and collectible archival storage and preservation, this is the video for you. Now, I'm going to set this up the way that I was taught this by one of my mentors in the trade. I learned this at the age of 14, and I was blown away by the information that he provided me, probably because I was only 14 years of age back then. Well, this person who taught me this was a well-known antique dealer in the Pennsylvania area. That's all I'm going to say. He literally died 10 years ago. A lot of his collections were sorted and sent to multiple auction houses. The end auction tally was in the millions of dollars. He was very well known. He was very beloved. Well, he presented this material to me in a unique way, and that's what I'm going to do here on YouTube for you guys. So we were talking one Saturday. I was at his house, and I was looking around his house, and he was a collector and a dealer who loved to display everything that he had. You could sit in his house, and he would have a $10,000 Tiffany lamp over here. On the other end of the spectrum, he would have a piece of $5,000 artwork hanging on the wall, and he would have a bag and boarded comic book laying out that you could literally see. This was before CGC, guys. This was back in the 1990s. So he had all these unique antiques, artifacts, collectibles, all in plain view, and I got to asking him, hey, what is the secret to preserving, to storing these items, to protecting them from the elements, to make sure that they're stored properly and hold their value long term? And he looked at me and he said, aha, Sean, I'm going to teach you this today. He said to me, and this was groundbreaking at the age of 14, and even when I think back, it still kind of is, because it really presents this material in a simplistic light. He said to me, everything that you own in the physical sense, whether it's an antique, whether it's a collectible, whether it's an item that you cherish, whether it's something that you're emotionally attached to that may not have a lot of financial value, it's composed of roughly, with few exceptions, 7 different elements. Now, I'm going to teach you the 7 different elements that anything that you own, anything that you cherish can be made up of. And then we're going to talk as to why antique and collectible archival preservation and storage is so complex. So he looked at me and he says, I'm now going to name you the roughly 7 different elements that any type of item you cherish can be made up from. So I said, okay, shoot. He looks at me and he says, the first type of element that anything that you collect is going to be made from is paper. Common sense, right? If you collect comic books, historical documents, posters, sports cards, vintage game cards, manuscripts, paper currency, all those items are made up of paper. The second element is metal. Vintage lunch boxes, precious metals, coins, tin signs, advertising signs, vintage Harley-Davidson motorcycles, antique bicycles, all that's made up of metal. The third category is glass. Anything that we're looking at, like art pottery, Tiffany vases, Tiffany lamps, porcelain, ceramics, any of those particular items are all made of glass. The fourth category is plastic. Vintage toys, video games, movies, vinyl records, compact discs, cassettes. All that particular stuff is made of plastic at its core. Bakelite jewelry, plastic. The next category is wood, antique furniture, mid-century modern furniture, vintage furniture, weapons, tools. Most of that stuff is manufactured predominantly by wood. The sixth category is what we call fabrics and textiles. That would be quilts, antique samplers, vintage t-shirts. If you have something that Elvis Presley wore on stage from the 1950s, that would fall under the fabric and textile category. The last one is a little bit confusing, and this is where they kind of cheat. This is the other category. Now, the other category isn't really that complex as you might think. The other category is made up of rocks, minerals, and bones. Now, before you think I'm getting creepy on you, because we are in the month of September, Halloween is only a month out, the bone category refers to fossils. So if you collect fossils, you automatically collect bone. Same thing is true if you collect Native American arrowheads, also known as quote-unquote Indian arrowheads. Those particular items are generally made of flint rock, which would fall under the rock collecting category. If we look at minerals, if you truly collect minerals, gemstones, diamonds, or even meteorites, that all falls under the mineral category. So my mentor went over this list. He then looked at me and he said, now let's review. The 7 predominant elements that anything you collect in the physical form can be made up of paper, metal, glass, plastic, wood, fabrics, and other, which is your rocks, minerals, and bones. He said, now let's get a little bit complex here. And this is what throws most people off. The more materials that make up your collectible or antique or artifact, whatever it is, the harder it is to preserve. And he repeated that twice. And he said, this is why when you collect certain items, there's an inherent risk there to investing in those items that most people don't see. Now, those of you that have been with me since the beginning or close to the beginning, if you remember, I've done several videos already on vintage toys. I've done several videos on vintage and modern era sneaker collecting. And what do I tell you guys? Avoid those categories like the plague. Well, one of the reasons I tell you to avoid those categories for the long term at least, not the short term, but the long term, is because both those categories are made up of different elements. Let's look at vintage toys. If we look at a vintage Star Wars toy, it could be an action figure that's factory sealed or even a play set. You have an item that's predominantly made of plastic that comes in plastic and cardboard packaging. Well, by nature, that particular item was not meant to sit in its original packaging for the long term, meaning 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years, whatever it is. As a result, that item has to be properly maintained and stored. And even if you do properly maintain and store it, guess what? There's still environmental risks to that item because it's not something as simple as a coin or a piece of currency, or even for that matter, a fabric or a wood item. It's something that is made up of multiple elements. Therefore, there is more of an inherent risk to investing in that item. Where's all my vintage video game fans out there that are paying thousands of dollars for Wada-graded games right now? In about 10, 20, 30 years, you're going to have a mess on your hands. Because even though I have a lot of faith in Wada's product, I have a lot of faith in the container or the enclosures that they use to preserve those games, that shrink wrap at some point that is on that factory seal game is going to start to yellow, deteriorate, and break down. And when it does, that game is no longer going to be technically factory sealed. The other risk you have for anybody out there buying a game like The Legend of Zelda, Final Fantasy, Dragon Warrior, any of those games that have a lithium-ion battery in them that you just put in a plastic tomb, at some point or at any point in the future, that battery can start leaking and it can leak through that game. And guess what? That $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 game that you bought that you thought was a great investment can be made worthless in the blink of an eye. That is a risk to that market. That's why when you guys ask me, well, Sean, how come you don't invest in vintage toys, vintage video games? How come you're not going after Air Jordans from the 1990s? That's why. Look at sneakers, guys. Sneakers. You go to a store right now, present day, you get a modern pair of Nike Air shoes, and you put them in your closet in the box. You don't even touch them. You don't even open the box. I guarantee you in 3 to 5 years, those particular sneakers are going to start to either yellow or start to deteriorate overall. Sneakers were not meant to be stored and maintained for decade upon decade upon decade. There is an inherent risk to those items. Now that we got the basics out of the way, most items are made out of 7 particular elements or a combination thereof. And also, you already know, the more materials that make up your collectible, the harder it is to preserve. I'll give you one more example before we move on. Those of you that collect comic books, vintage comic books, modern comic books, 99% of them out there have staples in the binding. Most people don't think about this on a regular basis. Those staples, if they start to rust, if they start to discolor, it can actually hurt the paper pages that make up that comic book. And at a certain point, it can no longer be restored. So as a result, comic books have an inherent risk because they're not just made of paper. They're made of paper and a metal product, the metal product being the staples, guys. So now, after my mentor taught me all these basic lessons, again, we're just touching on this today. We're not doing anything crazy because we're already 12 minutes into this video. He then told me there's certain other risks to collectibles after you understand the basic elements that they're made up from. And he said to me, the first big risk is environmental. Temperature, humidity are 2 tremendous threats to any antique and collectible. Doesn't matter what it is. If you put a piece of currency, if you put a comic book, if you put a historic document in the wrong type of humidity or the wrong temperature, guess what? It's going to warp. It's probably going to get ruined. It's probably going to absorb moisture. And as a result, it's going to affect the condition, which ultimately will affect the value. Going on from the environmental risk, there is an inherent risk of Mother Nature. Hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, flood areas, dimensional vortexes. You know, you thought you were walking through Zendikar. You ended up in Innistrad. Liliana came and took half your shit. Guess what? You're screwed. That's all part of a Mother Nature risk. That's a risk that you take depending on where you live. If you don't believe me, ask any coin collector who lives in the state of Florida. Ask them if they have copper coins in their collection. Guarantee you, 7 out of 10 coin collectors in the state of Florida will not invest long-term in copper coins because storage is a witch. And as a result of that, because of the temperature, because of the humidity influx, they have to be maintained very carefully because the surfaces of those coins are not stable. Copper coins are inherently risky overall when compared to investing in silver coins, when compared to investing in gold coins. Even me, guys, I almost have a typeset collection of U.S. classic coins. I'm going to be very honest. It's very valuable. I only have literally 2 or 3 copper coins in that whole collection overall. I do not like investing long-term in copper coins. I like silver, I like gold, and of course I like currency. But copper coins, they're very inherently stable. If you ask anybody that deals in coins, they'll tell you that. So just keep that in mind going forward. The next risk, we've already touched on this in the temperature and humidity aspect. We got to talk about air quality. Air quality is very important, especially if you are storing anything like vintage t-shirts, vintage clothing, textiles, quilts, anything made of fabric. Any type of smell, any type of odor in the air, that fabric is going to absorb. That's why even if you store fabrics and textiles with mothballs, if you pull that fabric out from being stored with mothballs and you smell it, it smells like mothballs. That's why, guys. Fabrics, textiles, any type of item like that absorbs odors in the air. You have to be very careful. That is another type of collectible I don't advise investing in the long term, is textiles and fabrics for that reason. They are very delicate. The next risk is obviously theft, fire, anything in that manner, meaning your house burns down, somebody doesn't like you, they burn your house down, you get robbed, you get involved in the wrong relationship, the chick takes half your stuff. That's a risk element that falls under theft and fire, obviously. You have an affair with Liliana. Liliana decides she doesn't like you anymore. She takes half your shit. Guess what? Theft, fire, risk. By the way, Liliana is a Magic the Gathering reference in case you guys are wondering where that name came from. I do not have an ex-girlfriend named Liliana. Thank God. Next risk we're going to talk about is bug infestation risk. I've seen it all, guys. Termites, cockroaches, mice, rats, you name it. I've seen every risk in that sense. That is something that you have to protect against. The final risk is something that most collectors don't realize. And I can guarantee you this because if you look in my shelf, I even violate this rule. It's light UV risk. Anything that you have on display, graded or ungraded, is automatically being exposed to sunlight, to UV lights, to even LED lights or the like. There is a risk there when you expose any type of antique and collectible to a light source. It doesn't matter the collectible. Now, obviously, if you have rocks, minerals, fossils, they would be least susceptible to any type of light damage. But you guys that collect paper collectibles or even pop culture collectibles, toys, proof cards, if you collect vintage Star Wars, the proof cards, a lot of those particular items can fade. They can take on sun damage. So that is something that you must keep in the back of your mind. In the next video, we are going to expand on this topic, and we're going to talk about graded and encapsulated collectibles and how they are still subject to environmental risk and precautions are needed. The reason why that's important is I see so many people out there that buy a Magic the Gathering card or a comic book or a sports card or a coin or a piece of currency and it's third-party graded. And they think because it's third-party graded, it's obviously UV protected. You don't have to take as many cautions as you would with an item that is ungraded. That is patently false, guys. I have seen CGC graded comic books take on moisture damage while in their slabs. I have seen coins tone. I have seen pieces of currency fade. I have seen action figures fade because they were held in a room where natural sunlight got at them day in and day out. And as a result, the particular toy, the packaging started to fade. You must be cognizant as to what you are investing in, where you're storing it, and how you're preserving it. I hope you enjoyed part 1 of the series. Part 2 will air in the next several weeks. Thank you and have a good night.